Good afternoon, everyone. We are still waiting on a few folks to join, but I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off so that we can get into Dr. Spinuzzi's presentation. Thank you for joining us for the latest edition of Humans at Work, HDO's webinar series. My name is Lewis Miller, and I'm the Assistant Director at HDO. Today, we are joined by Dr. Clay Spinuzzi, a professor of rhetoric and writing here at UT. He also teaches in HDO's master's degree program and our professional training series. Dr. Spinuzzi is here to discuss some basic self-management strategies, such as being deliberate about taking on commitments, scheduling tasks appropriately, retaining flexibility, pruning low-yield commitments, managing failure, and avoiding decision fatigue. If you've ever felt like there are just too few hours in the day to complete everything you need to do, then today's session is for you. A few notes before we get started. Please mute your microphone and turn off your video during Dr. Spinuzzi's presentation. If you have any pressing issues or questions during the session, feel free to send any HDO staff member a private chat. At the conclusion of the presentation, there will be approximately 15 minutes for Q&A. I will now turn things over to Dr. Spinuzzi, and I hope everyone enjoys the session.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me go ahead and get my presentation up here. And as Lewis, just checking, everybody can see my presentation? As Lewis said, I'm really interested in time management. I want to make sure that we can talk a little bit about some basic principles, and also when we get the second half of the webinar, I'm really interested in seeing what sorts of things you have in the chat that you want to talk to me about. What we're going to do today is talk about this stuff in three parts. The first part is just basic baseline principles about time management. Now, these are going to be very short. If you get really excited about this presentation, I do have a day-long seminar at the end of this month where I'm just going to be talking about time management all day long. It's a blast. Some people have told me it's changed their life. I mean, not everybody tells me that, but a few people do. Maybe you could be one of those people. Anyway, so we will talk about baseline project management, or sorry, time management. Next, we will talk about the basics of when to say yes and how to say no. And then the third part, we're going to throw it open to questions, and Lewis will manage that part. So let's talk about this stuff first. Bedrock principles. When you're trying to manage your commitments, I'm just going to start with these basic principles. One is to identify top-level goals, things that you want to accomplish, maybe for the year, the decade, or even your career, so that you can kind of orient to those goals with the other things that you do in your life. Number two, set aside regular time to plan your week mindfully. Three, represent that time in a way that makes sense to you. Many people use calendars or order to task lists. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. There's no magic best way to do this stuff. You just have to figure out what's going to work for you, as long as you're able to represent your time. And number four, mark times when you have control over your own time. Most of us don't have control over our own time at all parts of the day. Many of us don't have much control at all, but you can sort of draw boundaries around the things that you can control. Really quickly, identify top-level goals. You might, this is a staple of life coaching, this idea of writing a vision of where you want to be in 5, 10, or 50 years. And a life coach once told me, if you have something you want to accomplish in your life, write it down and then it'll happen. And I thought, that is just ridiculous. I'm going to reformulate this in a way that makes more sense. If there's something that you want to accomplish eventually in your life, write it down and then look at it like once a month and ask yourself, are the things that I am in control of right now pushing me towards that big vision? I mean, if they are, great. If they're not, maybe I rethink what my priorities are. I mentioned a little while ago that sometimes I give this time management seminar and somebody will say, it changed my life. One person told me this because when we got to this point, she realized that she was pretty good at managing her time day by day, week by week, but she realized that she hadn't kind of stepped back and asked, why am I doing all of this? And when she did, she was able to kind of say, you know, the job I was thinking about taking is not really going to get me where I want to be. I would rather be working in the nonprofit sector. So she retooled herself and she got a job in the nonprofit sector. And she felt like that was a better aligned to the sorts of things she wants to do. What I will say is that you need to have a conversation with yourself regularly about, you know, what are the main things that I want to do by the time, you know, I'm 10 years older. And when you do stuff week by week, figure out how these help you to get you to that goal. Number two, set aside regular time to plan your week mindfully. There was a little methodology called Getting Things Done that was super hot for about a minute in the early 2000s. And this is one thing that I took from it. You have a weekly review, specific time every week. Mine is 6 a.m. Monday morning. I sit down, look at my calendar, look at the task list, and ask myself, when am I going to do all this stuff? I put it down on the calendar with hard edges so that other stuff doesn't flood over it. I add gaps between tasks. When is your downtime? This is especially important during COVID. If you're working from home and zooming in, it's easy to have meetings back to back to back. And at some point, some point you're going to have to go to the bathroom, or you're going to have to get a drink of water. You've got to add gaps between those. You've got to be able to plan ahead in time, not just here's some things I got to get done, but here's when I'm going to get them done. Number three, represent time in a way that makes sense to you. I talk to a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to manage their time. Some of them use calendar on the phone. Some of them use paper planners. Some of them even decorate their paper planners with washi tape and whatnot. Not for me, but I understand. Some of them use different calendar views, and some of them have different task lists. The important thing is not to find the right system that works for everybody, because there is no system like that. The important thing is to be able to sort of figure out, after trying these things, which way works best for your brain, which way helps you to visualize what's going on during the week. You know, calendars are like a little miracle because they take something that's really abstract, time, and they turn it into something really concrete spatially. So when you're looking for a time to have a meeting, instead of thinking ahead to the future, you just look at this grid and you find space in it and you say, that's when I can have my meeting. That's pretty amazing. It's really important to have that representation, whatever it is, handy whenever you need it, so that you can reference what's going to happen next. And number four, you want to mark times when you have control over your own time. There's going to be some time when you just don't have much of a choice over when to do stuff. Somebody wants to have a meeting with me. The first thing I can tell them is, I can't meet you during these times on Tuesday and Thursday because I'm teaching class. And that supersedes everything. I don't have discretion over that time. I do have discretion over different parts of my time. I can find times when I do have discretion, when I don't have obligations, and I can also figure out what's flexible and what's not. Being able to visualize that on your calendar or whatever representation you're using is going to be extremely helpful as you make your way through life. Now, with those basics out of the way, let's talk about kind of the main event. And this is the sort of thing we are all struggling with, especially during COVID. I don't know about you, but I'm working out of my house right now. I have a green screen behind me, and I'm stuck in a bedroom trying to work day after day. And it's harder to say no to things because I don't have travel time, because I don't have to walk down the hall or to another building between meetings. So I could be theoretically available all the time. And so my colleagues seem to think that I should be available all the time. So how do I figure out when to say yes? How do I figure out how to say no? The fact is we can't do everything. So the big question is going to be, how do we do something in the time over which we have discretion? I'm going to talk about 5 principles here. practice self-respect, cultivate flexibility, prune, fail faster, and avoid decision fatigue. And we'll just take these in order. We'll start with practicing self-respect. You know, when you plan your week and you put something down on the calendar, you're basically programming your future self. You're telling your future self, you know, instead of watching, you know, daytime television or, you know, going out for a run or whatever, you have to do this from this time to this time. You're giving your future self direction. And when you get to that point in the calendar, you may be thinking, man, I would rather just watch daytime television or whatever. And you have to sort of discipline yourself to take your past self's direction. I'm going to suggest that, and you know, and some people seem to have a hard time with this. Like they set up a boundary, but they don't keep that boundary. I'm going to suggest you keep those boundaries. I want you to imagine your past self as a valued mentor. Imagine that instead of you putting that on your calendar, you get a call from somebody you respect, like the president of the United States. Doesn't have to be a specific president, you know, just pick one that you like a lot. Pretend it's Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln calls you up on his old-timey telephone. He says, Marissa, I would like you to do something for me. I would like you to work on such and such a task from 10 to 11 in the morning on Tuesday. It'll help you and it'll help the world. And, you know, Marissa might be like, yeah, all right, yes, sir, Commander-in-Chief. And, you know, I want you to have a person like that in your life, and I want it to be the person you look at in the mirror every morning. There's nobody who understands your needs like you do. So be a good mentor to yourself, your future self. And when you get to be your future self, take that mentorship from your past self. Take the time to be deliberate, set aside time to plan mindfully. Another professor in the HDO program, Art Markman, likes to talk about New Year's resolutions. He says, you know, they don't have a good success rate because too often when people get a New Year's resolution like, oh, by May, I want to have a beach body or whatever, it's a goal that's out there, but they don't have a good pathway to get there. So maybe they get a gym membership and then life happens and then they don't end up working out. If you have a goal like this, you have to practice mindfully to get to it. And that might mean, you know, putting on your calendar when you're going to go to the gym, making sure that you honor that commitment, building up habits to the point where you miss it if you don't go to the gym. And only then can you really get to that end goal. So practicing mindfully is kind of a big deal. Let's get to number 2, cultivate flexibility. Because the fact is life happens. If you have tasks coming in and you've already committed to something, but you need to figure out how to make this task work as well, you probably will need to look through the calendar and figure out, you know, what's flexible and what's not. What can I move around? What can't I? You can reorder and reprioritize if new things have happened that supersede the old ones. You should honor your past self's intent, but you can always react to those current contingencies. I think you should not get into the habit of robbing yourself to do good for somebody else. If you're always putting somebody else's needs in front of your own, that is a bad dynamic. But if you have two things that both meet your needs, you can shuffle the priorities and make sure, as long as you can make sure that both of them happen. I have a reminder here to talk about commander's intent. The idea is that often in the military, you will get command, but you keep the control. Like you are told there's an objective, but you get to figure out your own way to get to it. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. You've got a commander's intent, and that commander is yourself. And you just figure out how am I best going to get there, even though these contingencies are changing. Number 3 is to prune. And this is really sometimes the hardest thing for all of us. Decide what you shouldn't be doing. it's easy to say yes to a lot of stuff. And sometimes making or saying yes makes us feel, good about ourselves. We're helping other people out. We're accomplishing a lot of things. And that's all great until you have to do it all. And sometimes you just have to step back and go, okay, well, these are my top level goals. These are the goals that I said that I wanted to accomplish. Does this help me to achieve them? Really quick example, about 10 years ago, I noticed that my graduate students were struggling to finish their dissertations. A dissertation is like a big term paper, usually like 130 pages. It's kind of it's like a halfway step between a term paper and a book. And they get, 18 months or so to write one. And I noticed that they were having trouble getting started, getting through, getting things organized and structured. And I thought, gee, it would be so helpful if I wrote a little book on how to write your dissertation. I kicked this around for a while. I mentioned it to another professor, and she said, oh yeah, everybody intends to write that book, but nobody does. And as I thought about it, I realized why. It might have helped them, but it doesn't. But it doesn't help you with any of your other tasks you're trying to do. When I mapped out writing this dissertation book versus all of the other things that I was supposed to do, I realized it just didn't connect. Michelle asks, will we receive a copy of the slides? Sure. Remind me at the end, I'll paste them in the chat. Anyway, so yeah, no problem. So when you're thinking about pruning what doesn't help you to reach them, you can think in terms of eliminating, just stopping doing it, automating it, making a machine do it, delegating it, making somebody else doing it, or outsourcing, hiring it out. And I want to show you something that, I don't know, may change your life. This is from supposedly from President Dwight Eisenhower. When he was in the presidency, he was getting confronted with a lot of decisions and a lot of tasks, and he decided, if it's urgent and important, I will do it. If it's important but not urgent, I'll schedule a time to do it. If it's not important but it's urgent, I'll delegate it to somebody else. And if it's neither one of them, I'm just going to eliminate it. And I think this is a great thing to put on next to your monitor, or maybe on your monitor. Make it your screensaver. Let it help you to remind yourself what I do and do not want to end up doing. When you are looking at what's going on for today, you'll want to put a time on your calendar today to do it, or maybe later on the week or later on in the month. But you might also give it to somebody else. You might automate it. You might hire somebody to do it. If it's not something that is right here, find a different way to handle it. This brings me to number 4, fail faster. And the idea is to build in chances to fail at small tasks so you can succeed at big ones. And I'm just going to underline this part here. Whenever I talk about failing faster, somebody at the end of the presentation will say, but Dr. Spinuzzi, you have to realize I don't have the option to fail faster because I do. And then they list a bunch of big tasks that they can't fail at. Last time it was, I have to publish a bunch of papers, academic guy. I have to publish a lot of papers and they can't be trash. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. That's why you build in the failure earlier on. The idea is that we learn when we fail. We adjust when we fail. Imagine driving down the street. When people are driving, they kind of do this. They're making these micro level changes in the wheel, just turning it barely. And that's because they're adjusting to the roadway. You can imagine if that wheel was completely straight and they held it completely immobile, at some point that car would drive off the road and hit a tree, because you have to be able to adjust in order to drive correctly. And the idea is here is the same way. You're never going to be perfect, but you can build in feedback loops. So you can see how well you're doing at any point. Where is it going wrong? And you can figure it out before it becomes a big problem. If you have something that you really can't fail at, work backward to see what path you're taking to make that end product happen. And ask yourself, where can I fail in that process? Barbara mentions University of Chicago study says we don't learn when we fail. We usually shut down when we fail. I think you're right. Maybe these are the big problems. I've been reading a lot of stuff on entrepreneurial failure lately. I mean, entrepreneurship is by definition about failing, right? And when entrepreneurs fail, they have to figure out how to make sense of their failure. And many of them just shut down. They're like, that was too painful. They do not become serial entrepreneurs. Many of them have kind of a painful lesson that they have to absorb, and then they figure out what can I control, what can I not control, and then those are the ones who become serial entrepreneurs and start over and over again. D. Gibbs says, yeah, that's hard for overachievers. Yes, that is probably why entrepreneurs tend to be C students, because they have become comfortable with small failures and they're able to push beyond them. For people who are overachievers, people who are perfectionists, it's just too painful. And I guess what I'm saying is that you can build ways to become, just in a little way, a little bit more entrepreneurial, a little bit more comfortable with failing, so that you can create those successes later on. Marilyn, I think that would be a great idea. I do have a day-long seminar on communicating like an entrepreneur. I'm not sure when that's going to come up next. Lewis will be able to tell you, but that's a really central part of it. Okay, so I feel like we've spent enough time on this slide. Let's go to the next one. And this is the last one: avoid decision fatigue. And this is something that I think is really interesting. If you look at what cognitive psychologists say about decision making, they point out that each decision takes actual energy. It's you have to take some energy out of your day to make a decision, and at some point in the day we get fatigued and we start making hastier decisions. So you might want to figure out, when are you sharpest during the day? Figure out what time of the day, what time of the week you're best able to make decisions. One good way to do that is just to keep a diary, and you know, just watch yourself for about 2 weeks and ask yourself, like, when do I feel most on top of things? When do I feel fatigued? When do I feel like I can't focus anymore? Figure out when that happens, and then when that band of your best decision making is, that's when you make your decisions during the day. Make your decisions on paper. When it comes to later, you just follow the decisions you've already made. So I do my project managing when I'm really sharp, 6 a.m. Monday morning. And then later on, let's say 3 p.m., I'm completely thrashed, but I can follow my own directions. And that's when I tend to schedule brainless tasks like returning emails. Set up your own personal rules, your policies, and your procedures during the time when you're sharp, and then follow them when you're dull, when you're not able to make those decisions anymore. If you can figure out that kind of rhythm, I think you'll find that it's much easier to get through the day. Okay, so I've talked a lot, and what I'm going to suggest is that we use this as a guide for questions in the chat, but you can also drop in other questions you want to ask, and we'll field those as well. All right, and while I'm waiting for the questions to get dropped into the chat or insights, oh, hey, how are you doing? From Philadelphia, PA. I'll just kind of scroll back through the chat and see if there's anything else that we might talk about. I will be getting you a copy of the slides. Yes, I agree. New Coke is an excellent case study. I can't believe they did that. Fast failure brought up a number. Oh, how do you recommend dealing with fear of failure that turns into procrastination? You know, I think if you have a fear of failure, it will often turn into procrastination. We don't want to fail, and doing stuff makes us fail, you know, faster. And sometimes failing faster doesn't sound too appealing. This is why my students, when I ask them to do a paper, they wait for inspiration to strike, and inspiration always strikes the night before the paper is due. It's weird how that works. And what I tell them, and I'm going to generalize this a little bit more in a second, what I tell them is, you know, don't wait until the paper is due. The first day it's assigned, open a document, and then just drop some notes in, just notes to yourself, and then close the document. Open it the next day, look at your notes, add a little bit more. And I tell them, if you start doing this in a really directed way, you'll be surprised by how quickly this turns into a draft. I would say the same thing kind of more generally. If you have something that you need to happen, don't think about that big thing that happened that you have to do. Don't think about something that will take you days and days to finish. That paper that you have to write, that report that you have to turn in, that dissertation that a dissertation student has to write. Instead, break it down into pieces and think about something that you can handle within 1 or 2 hours. If you can turn this thing into tasks that you can actually put on your calendar, then you can just do that task. And that's just one step forward. Taking one step, much easier than, I don't know, hiking across the USA. But if you do it often enough, you're gonna actually hike across the USA. Brandon asks that fast failure brought up a number of comments. Can you talk a little bit about how you would break up a big task into small, failure acceptable ones? Sure. Well, I keep using the example of the dissertation, and it's just at the top of my mind, so I'm going to talk about it. Dissertation, like I said, like 180, 200 pages, and it should bring new knowledge into the world. And for a PhD student, that can be pretty darn scary. What I ask them to do is to break this into tasks. I'm like, well, you're probably going to have 7 chapters, right? I'm sorry, 5 chapters, 3 main ones, and then an introduction and conclusion. So make an outline. All right, now let's talk about each chapter. What do you need to do in order to make that chapter happen? And we break them into smaller things and smaller things. And eventually we get to the point where they're putting in tasks like Tuesday, 9 to 11, edit chapter 1. Now that's an easy task. I mean, that's one of those brainless tasks. Editing doesn't take a lot of brain power to do. You know, you just make sure that the subjects and verbs agree and things like that. When you break it down to that level, it's easy to do those tasks, but every once in a while you also have to kind of pull back and say, okay, how does this task feed into the other ones? Being able to visualize it in, let's say, a task list or a spreadsheet or a network diagram, whatever helps you to kind of get your head around it, that's important because you can pull back and see the whole. If you can figure out how to shuffle between that micro level and the macro level, you're going to feel a lot more confident because you can actually see the dominoes fall as you go on. Especially during the pandemic. Yes.
Clay, I was just going to suggest there's a lot of questions coming in. So if you want me to, I'll keep an eye on them and just kind of bring some up as we're going along.
Okay.
To kind of help so that you can just focus on the responses. One question involves kind of expectations and leadership, almost more than just direct tasks, but how can you provide support to someone who reports to you who is struggling to accomplish tasks?
Oh, well, I mean, the easy answer is to send them to my time management seminar. Yes, but more specifically, I think I think managing people is hard because you kind of have to figure out where are they and what do they need to learn. And I think in this particular case, I think it might be worthwhile to give them a specific top level task and then ask them to break it down into smaller chunks. There's I'm going to drop this into the chat. I think it's Barbara Minto, the pyramid principle. This book is old as dirt. I think it's from the 90s, but she talks about taking a big task and then just breaking it into smaller ones by drawing a little pyramid. So there's the task here, and then she breaks it into like 2 or 3 or 4 smaller pieces, and then she breaks each one of these into smaller ones, and it allows you to sort of visualize the parts of the whole thing that we were just talking about. I think maybe giving them that and suggesting, okay, each task should start with an imperative verb and end with a noun, an object. Doing that can help people to kind of get their heads around, how do I turn this thing into a task? Let me give you a quick example. If you're, let's say the top level task is make a submarine sandwich. First thing that you might do to make a submarine sandwich is to look up a recipe. So underneath that, instead of saying recipe, that's a noun, recipe what, you say look up a recipe. How do you look up a recipe? Well, Google it. I mean, so that would be a subtask underneath there. Focus on those imperative verbs and the objects that you're accomplishing. Make sure that each of them collectively fulfill the task in the level above it. And I think you're in a good place. Now, when people are not used to doing this sort of thing, you will have to spend some time with them, just kind of being supportive and saying, okay, what would you do here? And then gently correcting them. They are afraid of failure too. I mean, I think a lot of times when people are just stuck on the low macro level, they're kind of afraid in terms of like, how do I turn this into something larger? How do I get there from here? And assuring them that, you know, this is a learning process and I will teach you how to do it. And it's okay to fail as long as you learn from it. I think that will get them pretty far.
Okay, great. And I also like that, you know, provides them a lot of autonomy as opposed to just giving them the task themselves.
Yeah.
Cool. And so another one we got here is, yes, I kind of understand that we have to say no sometimes, but how, this might be interesting, how do you respectfully say no to someone who doesn't necessarily like being told no?
Yeah, that's tough. I think you can simply say, I wish I could help you. However, my dance card is full. Or well, let me see. If it's a supervisor, it gets a little dicey, right? If it's somebody else who's in a lateral position, it gets easier because you can always appeal to the authority of your supervisor. I'm sorry, I don't have time. So-and-so has got me doing this stuff instead. You might, I mean, I don't know if I would show them your calendar, but you could say, look, I only have X number of hours left in this week, and I have to devote them to these things. Every once in a
I
while,
didn't even mute anything. It was fine. I didn't touch anything.
yeah, Cambridge, you're unmuted now. Anywho, yeah,
Okay,
go
and
ahead.
then this is one that I might ad lib a little bit to. People often disparage email as low stakes, mindless, disruptive, etc., but it is required. Is there research or advice for how to use email effectively, efficiently, smartly, to use it to accomplish real work?
I actually have a webinar on this. Lewis might have the recording. Yeah, I mean, there are some basic principles to making email work well for you. And these are basic document design principles, honestly. So things like forecasting what you're trying to do, putting the main information and maybe the decision you're asking for in the subject line, making sure that there is a clear decision ask and a clear date by which you'll be needing the decision. These are all really important. I'm going to add that to the list of things that I need to blast out. Tej Singh says, your webinar and email effectiveness was fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll make sure and send that out as well.
All right, and this one is interesting because we all know that multitasking is not the most productive way to operate. How do you handle context switching when you have a packed schedule with meetings after meetings?
Yeah, that is horrible. I'm getting better at it, but I'm also getting worse because I'm getting older. And the fact is, at the age of 30, you reach your peak cognitive capacity, and then you begin a long, slow, steady decline. And it's real decline. If somebody were to weigh your brain at age 30, and then again at age 90, it would weigh about 10% less at age 90. So we're all kind of fighting, I mean, all of us who are past 30 are fighting that. And it makes context switching harder and harder. One of the things that I tend to do is to plan my day and embed context in my calendar, my personal calendar items. And that way, when I'm about to go to a meeting, I can click on that, see the context right there. If I don't do that, maybe I link to a document, or I have a notebook with notes written. I try to pre-process it as much as possible so I can kind of glance and get the gist of what's going on. The times that I don't do that and I just go cold into meetings, I'm useless.
All right. What do you think about the Pomodoro technique, breaking work into 25-minute segments?
I think it is very helpful to some people. I've not tried it myself because I tend not to have trouble focusing on tasks. It's sometimes the opposite. I have trouble getting away from focusing on them. But I think it's something to try out. It's another way of kind of disciplining yourself to so that you don't flit from task to task. One of the things that that we really have to do, and that is becoming harder and harder these days, is to really get into a task, devote yourself to a task, and get into what they sometimes call a flow state, where you're really sort of totally devoted to the task and you can just fly through it. And we've all been in a flow state. We can also think of times where time is just flying by and you're just knocking these tasks out right and left and you feel great. You can't get into a flow state if you're interrupted too often. So I think the Pomodoro technique is there to sort of train you to focus enough that you can get into a flow state. Okay. Whatever you can do to get in there, that'd be great. Me personally, I try to block out like 3 or 4 hours when I have a really big task. Okay.
All right, so there's a few general questions around the same idea, so I'll kind of try to summarize. We've hit on this a little bit, but what do you do when supervisors or leaders don't have the same tolerance for failure or mistakes that other members of the team do? Maybe how to explain the value of failing to someone who doesn't really see it that way?
Yeah, I mean, you can always send them this seminar. but make me take the hit. But I think more than that, I think you can say, I think you can appeal to the fact that we all learn, and you might even approach it as, okay, I'm not great at this task, but I'm working on getting better. I mean, if you say that before the task begins, you might be able to say, here's the things that I'm going to work on this time. Another thing that you can do is be proactive about doing postmortems afterwards. Like you've completed the task, you can kind of proactively say, all right, so here's what I learned from it. Here's what I will do next time. Here's what I won't do next time. This basically means you're taking charge of your own learning. It also means you're kind of emotionally managing your manager, which kind of sucks. But it's something that you can take control over.
And someone kind of agrees with you on that. They said, in response to that, one of those questions, in a distributed environment, agreeing on process helps. Early drafts are a form of starting slow and failing small to go fast. Basically, it sounds like keeping people aware of how things are going in these smaller steps before you get to a large failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially like you said, especially in a distributed environment, one of the things that we have in local environments, like if we're all working in an office together, we have something called mutual adjustment. That's like the chatter or the dropping by people's offices to give them an idea of what's going on. These sort of low-level lateral communications that happen constantly. When we get into a distributed environment, things change. I mean, you can't just drop by somebody's office. You might Zoom with people, but it's typically structured. It's typically for meetings. You might have Slack, or some other messaging system, but it tends to interrupt what people are trying to do. And so it's just kind of it's kind of a different situation. And I think a big part of what we've been doing for the past year with COVID is trying to figure out how to reproduce productive mutual adjustment. Some people have figured it out. I don't know that I have.
Okay, and we've got now a statement that is not really a question, but I think you'll appreciate it. Tolerance for failure seems to be rooted in the degree to which the supervisor is responsible for innovation. High compliance type personalities need a lot of help to understand the value of an early draft. They tend to do better with a 100% complete one-page briefing on what the final product will have.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's more about dealing with personalities and the context of failure and the need for perfection.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really, the supervisor sets the tone, and then you kind of have to figure out, do you work the supervisor? Do you work with the supervisor? Or do you shop for a new supervisor? That is, say, go find another job. And I should probably mention right now, unemployment is pretty low. So I'm just saying, you've got options.
And then I'll now also say the chats coming in, or the questions coming in via chat, have slowed down a little bit. If anyone would like to ask their question via audio, just simply raise your hand in the reactions tab, and we will get to you. One new one here from Sean. What courage can we give ourselves when facing time pressure, particularly when the activity is one requiring creativity, such as innovation?
Creativity is hard, right? Because you're having you're having to work towards an objective that you can't totally see yet. It's not like you're manufacturing a widget, you know exactly what that widget is supposed to look like. You're groping towards a solution. So, I mean, I think to an extent, you just have to set up your environment where you can spend time, dedicated time, working on just that task, that creative task. And you have to sort of monitor what works best for you. I'll give you a really quick example. A friend of mine, when he was working on his dissertation, got really frustrated and just came to his supervisor and vented about how he just couldn't track everything. And when he took a breath, she said, "Bill, you just need bigger paper." And she's probably right. You know, sometimes it's better to just represent something in a bigger format, or if you want to, try a smaller format or a different format or different medium, and just work around to see what works best for you in terms of creativity. But that means that you have to be able to sort of monitor what your process looks like, try varying different parts of your process over the long term, and really fine tune it so that you know what's going to work really best for you in this kind of work context.
Okay, and then we've kind of touched on this a bit, but any suggestions for managing up? How can you gain support from a supervisor to effectively implement these techniques?
I think a lot of people are in the chat talking about how to manage up by saying, okay, which task do you want me to drop? That is good. It's sort of reactionary and in the moment. I think you can also maybe develop a plan for yourself and take it to the supervisor and say, you know, these are some things I would like to try with tasks. I think it will make me more effective. Let's talk about how we might be able to do this together. Honestly, I mean, as long as you present it in a way of, you have objectives, supervisor, I want to meet them more effectively, I think supervisors will be receptive. On the other hand, if you say, you know, you're not supervising me well, let me tell you what you're doing wrong, that's not going to go over so well. If you like, you might keep this until your next overview or like review, your 360 review or whatever, and bring it in and be proactive. I think mostly supervisors, as long as you present it well and within their goal set, they will be receptive because they know that people work differently. And hopefully they know that forcing everybody in the same mold is not going to give them the results they desire.
And similar on that note, someone has a really unique idea that seems to work well for them. I have a project list and of course a list of subtasks. I show it to my manager when he wants to add something and make him rank and prioritize.
Yeah,
Might not work for everyone, but that's great.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the thing about having a calendar and a task list, a master task list, is that you do have a really good idea of what you need to do and what moving pieces there are, and you can communicate that with other people. It's tremendous. I mean, I manage a small team. We have a shared task list, so we can see what's going on. We can also see if somebody's getting bogged down, so that we can flow tasks to a different person.
All right, and Vivek has their hand up, and so feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure. I was wondering, how can a perfectionist delegate tasks to others when the results of those tasks are not to his or her expectation?
Yeah, I think that is a hard trap to get out of, honestly. I mean, because if you're a perfectionist, you know how to control things, but delegating means you lose that control. You're stepping out in faith and trusting that other person. I would suggest that this is going to be a learning task for the perfectionist as well as the person they're delegating to. So maybe what the perfectionist could do is look at their tasks, find one that they don't feel has to be perfect. Maybe a low-level task, maybe something they could easily take care of themselves in half the time, but they know it's okay if it's just going to be okay. Delegate it to somebody and see what happens, see how it feels. I really, if we were talking about delegating in the first place, it is kind of a leap of faith, and failing in a small way or giving somebody a chance to do something that you're okay with being a small failure, or that you're okay with redoing if you need to, that might be the best way to go. And train yourself up so that you can have faith in people with the larger tasks.
Thanks, Vivek.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, one question here. I do great with tasks that are 80% to 100% under my control. I tend to get stuck when I have to rely on others to move the project forward. My part seems like to open the door for a long, slow slog back and forth with other colleagues. Suggestions? And then she adds, these are people that I do not supervise.
Oh yeah, the people you don't supervise, they're very difficult because you have to manage laterally. I think when I am in a situation like that, what I tend to do is as much of the pre-planning as I need to, so that I can give them very specific options and very specific deadlines. So I'll say, okay, we need to do such and such. Should we do A, B, or C? Let me know by Friday. And that will at least, narrow the set of possibilities that I'll get back. If I toss them an unstructured task, who knows where they're going to go with this. Now, that being said, you may find that people push back on that. I know I have at least one colleague who, if I give them 3 options, they will give me 8 more. And I just have to be ready to deal with that. Yeah, I think a lot of it is just drawing boundaries and drawing them clearly enough that people understand what they are.
Okay, I tried to cover everything I've seen coming into the chat. If I've missed anyone, feel free to either re-enter your question or raise your hand and we'll call on you. Connie has a question. Go ahead, Connie.
Hi, Clay. So this question goes back to your bullet point about cultivating flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So my team, I manage a team, and we have a lot of tasks. There's lots of delegation and everything else going on a regular basis, setting up clear expectations. But one thing that strikes me that happens when you have a large team and when you're serving a lot of stakeholders is that stuff comes up that sometimes can become extremely time consuming. And I'm trying to figure out how to plan for unexpected chaos. In other words, like, what number of hours do I set aside in the week for dealing with the stuff that I know is going to come up, but I don't know exactly what will come up. And then the other kind of flexibility issue that pops up is like, I've got a team of go-getters and we want to pursue excellence. We've got all these tasks and I want them to occasionally take vacations. So there's also sort of that kind of like a tricky, like, what amount of time per week, per month should we be allocating to our own professional development so that we can pursue excellence or pursue efficiencies at a higher level? And then how much time should we be planning in for chaos? So anyway, I'm going to throw those out there in case you know of some research or recommendations or literature out there.
Yeah, I mean, for the chaos part, I don't know of any specific literature, but I think the fact that there will be chaos, you just don't know what it is very helpful. I mean, that suggests to me that that maybe you have like a regular, maybe a regular team meeting time. Miriam in the chat suggests reading Planning for Chaos, which does sound like an applicable title. I don't know anything about it, but I think being able to plan at least a couple hours during the week, knowing that you're going to get some chaos, and having everybody online so that you can deal with it, I think that would be really good. I can imagine a team meeting where you're like, well, the shit hit the fan again. Let's delegate, and then you can delegate right there in the meeting. The other question about self-improvement, are you thinking in terms of like working on yourself like we've been talking about here, or taking, let's say, an HDO class?
Yeah, so I've been doing this for me. Like I'm here
Yeah.
as part of this sort of attempting to, and for this, instead of making it like a flexible thing, I'm trying to look at campus events a couple weeks ahead and giving myself a little budget of time. Like, I want to spend this many hours on lectures and making it almost like a goal instead of something that I just squish in, which has been more effective. Like, I'm actually here. But I also want to try to figure this out at the level of my direct reports, right? Like, I want to make sure, because I have these really smart, talented people that are working for me. We don't have a lot of promotions available, but I want to make sure that they feel like they're growing and that they are growing, right?
Yeah.
And so, because I think that that's a big part of our satisfaction in our jobs, right? Is not just like, I'm good at doing the same thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
But when, like, if I have a direct report say something to me like, I feel like a trained monkey could do this part of my job, like, that's a sign to me that we need a new challenge for that person. And so I'm trying to figure out, not just for myself, but also like, how do I create a team culture of, these principles so that we, not just individually, but as a team, can be really excellent at managing our time in purposeful and, growth-oriented kind of ways.
I got it. I love the way you're thinking about this. I mentioned flow state earlier, and the thing about flow state is that it has to be challenging enough that it's interesting, but not so challenging that it's impossible. And getting that sweet spot is really hard. I mean, especially after somebody comes in, they master their job, and they're like, well, what's next? I like the idea of building in time for them to try out self-improvement stuff. And I think you might integrate that with periodic reviews, where instead, like in addition to saying, well, here's what you're doing well, here's what you can improve on, you can say, tell me about what you learned. Tell me about what you want to learn next, and maybe do some curation in terms of here's some time to make that happen. Yeah, I really like that idea. I'm all about continual learning.
And I would also maybe just add, Connie, if every time that chaos does happen, maybe start a clock and see how much time you guys spend on chaos, and then you can average out and find out, okay, well, 3 hours a week, we have chaos every time, so that's how much time we need to set aside for it.
Yeah, we have a log now. I don't officially call it the chaos log. It's more like the lead blah 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 special cases log or something like this. But yeah, we're tracking it now because it's a thing.
Well, good.
One final comment here is a comment, not a question, but just 24 years as an engineer supporting manufacturing in the semiconductor industry, managing and planning for chaos is what we do. Well, thanks everyone. I'll say this has been a fantastic discussion. I really appreciate everyone contributing as much as they can to the chat, and then also via audio. I'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone that will include a recording of today's session. If you have any comments or questions for improvement, you can respond to me with that email, let me know. We'll also include links to the other materials that we've referenced that Clay Spinuzzi has produced for HDO in the past, and links to his full day courses if you're interested. In addition, Dr. Spinuzzi and his rhetoric and writing colleagues are developing some new certificate programs focused on digital storytelling, writing for social change, collaborative writing, writing for small business, and several other topics. We're planning to launch those new programs soon, and we'll be sure to let you know when those are up and ready to go. But thanks again, everyone, for being so involved and the great questions, and hope you have a great day.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. If you have any follow-up questions, I'm going to just drop my email in the chat. No question is too small. Well, there should be an @ between Clay Spinuzzi and @utexas.edu. Sorry about that. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. I know I didn't get to a couple of them in the chat. I'll be happy to talk to you offline. Thank you again, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.
Everyone, thank you. Thanks, Clay.
Thanks.
Thank you.